Some fires are accidents. Some are cover-ups. And some are confessions. That was the first line of the 911 call placed just after 3:17 a.m. when the flames consumed the historic Varnier estate, an opulent vineyard tucked into the Golden Hills of Sonoma County, California. By the time first responders arrived, the sky was glowing a hellish orange. Local volunteer firefighters, many of whom had once tasted the family's signature Cabernet, could do little but stand back and watch the home's redwood bones collapse into themselves. Inside, investigators would later recover 2 charred bodies, one male, one female. At first, it seemed tragically simple. A lover's quarrel turned deadly. But nothing about the Varnier family was ever simple. The woman was quickly identified as Isabel Varnier, 29 years old, British-born heiress, daughter of the late Madeline Varnier, and recent surprise beneficiary of the family's fortune. A rising star in international fashion. Quiet, sharp, mysterious. The man beside her was Nathan Varnier, 32, her first cousin once removed. A corporate attorney for the family trust. A man whose smile had gotten quieter in recent years. The rumors about him and Isabel weren't new, but they'd never been confirmed. Not until they died together. The coroner labeled it a murder-suicide. That should have been the end of it. But then there was the text, sent by Isabel just hours before her death, to an unknown contact in London. Don't come. He knows everything. Those 4 words shattered the clean narrative. Who was he? What did he know? And who was Isabel trying to protect? By morning, the Varnier tragedy was headline news from Napa to New York. Vineyard heiress and cousin dead in apparent murder-suicide. Fire destroys legacy estate amid will dispute. The press circled like vultures. But none of them understood what the family had been hiding for decades. Because buried beneath the ashes, beneath the elegance and wine and whispered affairs, was a secret. One forged in greed, polished with charm, and sealed with blood. The Varnier estate had stood for over 150 years, passed down through generations like sacred scripture. Eleanor Varnier, the family's matriarch, ruled it like a queen, cold, exacting, and utterly immune to scandal. But weeks before the fire, Eleanor died suddenly of a stroke. Within days, a new will surfaced, naming Isabel as the sole heir to the family's land, business holdings, and control of the international Varnier brand. It was a shock to everyone, especially Nathan, who had expected to take the reins of the trust, and especially Clara Varnier, Isabel's aunt, who had quietly served as Eleanor's power of attorney and resented being passed over. The change ignited resentment like dry leaves. Behind closed doors, the family fractured. Allegiances shifted. Secrets festered. And then, Isabel announced she was marrying a Frenchman named Adrien Lassalle, someone none of them had ever met. The whispers grew louder. Nathan stopped attending meetings. Clara hired a forensic accountant. Adrien was seen arguing with Nathan on the back veranda 2 days before the fire. And Isabel stopped smiling. One vineyard worker, who wished to remain anonymous, reported hearing a scream echo through the vines the night before the blaze. Another swore he saw 2 figures fighting near the cellar just after midnight. But the most chilling detail wasn't revealed until the forensics team swept the ruins. The gun that killed Nathan? It was found over 30 feet from where his body lay, unfired, and Isabel's fingerprints weren't on it. This wasn't a lover's suicide pact. This was a murder scene. And as the investigators dug deeper, it became clear. Someone in the family wanted Isabel dead, and someone else wanted her to take the blame. She died for the will. That's what the thumbnail on the viral documentary would later read. But in this story, the will wasn't just a document. It was a map, one that pointed toward betrayal, obsession, and calculated revenge. It would take detectives across California, Nevada, New York, London, and the vineyards of Bordeaux before the truth finally surfaced. And even then, not everyone would survive it. Resentments buried beneath privilege, and the cracks that began to form long before the fire. They weren't born into love. They were born into position. To understand how a family ends in ash, you have to go back, before the fire, before the will, before the affair, to when the rot first took root. The Varnier family wasn't always drenched in scandal. Once, they were the symbol of taste, refinement, legacy. But legacy is a double-edged sword. At the center of it all was Eleanor Varnier, the Iron Widow who held the family in her diamond-studded grip for nearly 4 decades. She spoke with the grace of old money, but make no mistake, Eleanor was a battlefield general in pearls. She outlived 2 husbands, raised 3 children, buried 1, and presided over an empire that spanned vineyards, real estate, and European art dealing. Her estate wasn't just worth millions. It was history, privilege, and expectation all rolled into a sunlit facade. And with her death came the unraveling. Let's start with Isabel. She wasn't supposed to inherit anything. Born out of a scandal herself, her mother Madeleine had fallen in love with a French musician and fled to London in her 20s. Isabel was the lost branch, the black sheep with perfect posture. She visited occasionally as a child, never fitting in among the cousins who wore their entitlement like cologne. But she was beautiful, brilliant, observant. Madeleine died of breast cancer when Isabel was only 18. A few weeks later, a plane ticket to California arrived. First class, no return. It was from Eleanor. No explanation, just an opportunity. Isabel moved into the guest house and, for a time, was treated more like an intern than a granddaughter. But Eleanor saw something in her. Quiet strength, discretion, discipline. She began grooming Isabel, not just for the business, but for the throne. And that's when the whispers began. Nathan Varnier had always been the presumed heir. Born and raised in Napa, the golden boy of the 3rd generation. Ivy League, law degree, charismatic. He'd memorized the wine blends by age 12 and closed his first vineyard deal at 25. But beneath the polished exterior was a storm. Nathan's parents, Richard and Clara, were a mismatched pair. Richard, Eleanor's eldest son, died in a boating accident when Nathan was just a teen. Clara, left with a legacy but no power, grew bitter. She kept Nathan close, suffocatingly so. And when Eleanor began shifting her attention to Isabel, Clara turned venomous. At board meetings, she nitpicked Isabel's reports. At dinners, she corrected her French. When Eleanor announced that Isabel would attend meetings abroad on her behalf, Clara laughed, and then stopped being subtle. But the real tension wasn't about business. It was about affection. Because while Eleanor never said it out loud, everyone could feel it. She loved Isabel, not like she loved the others. And then, there was the affair. It started in Paris, a family wine auction. Nathan and Isabel were sent to represent the brand. 2 nights, 1 hotel suite, too much red wine. No one knew the exact details, but by the time they returned, something had changed. The way Nathan looked at her, the way Isabel avoided eye contact. Something had been crossed. For months, there were rumors, long glances in the hallway, locked office doors. But no proof. Isabel stayed silent. Nathan spiraled. He pulled out of several deals. Started drinking at the estate. Missed a quarterly filing deadline. Unthinkable for him. When Eleanor questioned him, he snapped. Publicly, he was put on sabbatical for stress. Isabel, meanwhile, was made acting trustee. Now at a new variable, Adrien Lassalle, a French sommelier-turned-consultant. Adrien met Isabel at a tasting in Bordeaux during one of her European trips. He was charming, intense, magnetic in that way only truly dangerous people are. 3 months later, they were engaged. The family was blindsided. No one had met him. No prenup had been discussed. Nathan refused to attend the engagement dinner. Clara threatened to contest the will if it wasn't reviewed. And Eleanor, well, she remained silent. But some say she looked tired that night. For the first time, unsure. Weeks later, she was dead. Stroke, the doctor said. But the timing felt too convenient. Isabel, barely out of mourning, became the sole heir. And Nathan? He was cut out entirely. Bitterness doesn't start as poison. It starts as bruises, subtle, ignored, explained away. But in the Varnier family, those bruises turned toxic. Behind the grandeur of wine cellars and French vacations was a pressure cooker of expectation, humiliation, and unresolved desire. Nathan resented Isabel for taking what he believed was his. Clara blamed Isabel for corrupting her son and stealing her place. Adrian watched it all like a chessboard, calculating, waiting. And Isabel? She stood at the center of it all, graceful, alone, and surrounded by people who loved her for the wrong reasons. By the time the fire came, it wasn't just about a will. It was about power, legacy, and control. Someone had waited long enough, and someone else had reached their breaking point. The week leading up to Isabel's death reveals mounting tension, secret alliances, and the last celebration the Varnier family would ever host. This sets the stage for the unraveling, drawing us into a week brimming with secrets, suspicion, and a party that would become a funeral in disguise. The invitations were sealed in gold. The vows were written in blood. There was no reason for it to end in fire. The week began with champagne. Strings of twinkling lights stretched across Eleanor Varnier's sun-drenched vineyard estate in Sonoma. The guest list was exclusive, 80 names, hand-picked, printed in calligraphy on bone-white cardstock. It was supposed to be the wedding of the year. Instead, it became the prelude to a tragedy. 3 days before the fire, Isabel stood barefoot in her dressing room, her silk wedding gown hanging like a ghost behind her. She was quiet, distant, like someone rehearsing their own eulogy. The staff noticed. Her cousin Delphine, flown in from Paris for the ceremony, later told investigators. She looked beautiful, but not here, like she was trying to disappear into herself. The estate buzzed with tension. The kind you can't place, but you feel like a crack under marble or the pressure drop before a storm. Nathan was back, not officially invited, but had a right to be there, or so he claimed. He arrived 2 days early, sober and smiling, his presence carefully polite but unmistakably sharp. Clara watched everything from the edge of the terrace like a hawk in pearls. She hadn't spoken to Isabel since the will was read, but she made sure her suite overlooked the bridal suite. Adrian, the groom, remained charming, enigmatic, and completely unreadable. He didn't seem like a man in love. He seemed like a man who had already won. The rehearsal dinner was held under a grove of eucalyptus trees. Candlelight flickered between glasses of Bordeaux. Speeches were made. Adrian raised his glass and called Isabel the anchor of my storm. Nathan didn't applaud. Later that night, Isabel was seen leaving her suite alone, barefoot, walking toward the edge of the vineyard. A groundskeeper saw her crying behind the chapel. She stayed there for 45 minutes. When she returned, her engagement ring was gone. The next day, someone slipped an envelope under Adrian's door. No return name. Just 3 words, typed in red block letters. She knows everything. We still don't know who sent it. But that afternoon, Adrian canceled the florist. It's hard to say who really set things in motion. The tension in the estate wasn't linear. It was circular. Everyone feeding off each other's doubt, regret, jealousy. Nathan, for one, was unraveling. He cornered Isabel's longtime friend Serena in the library, drunk off Pappy Van Winkle in desperation. Whispered something about fixing things before it's too late. Serena left early the next morning. She hasn't spoken publicly since. Meanwhile, Isabel was changing. Not visibly, but internally. Her planner noted she removed several items from the ceremony. No father-daughter dance. No bridal party. No vows to be exchanged aloud. It was like she didn't want anyone to see her, the planner later said. Like she was hiding in plain sight. That night, just 18 hours before the wedding, Isabel met privately with a notary. The appointment was unscheduled. According to records, she made amendments to her will. The new version was never filed. But the next morning, Isabel would be dead. Here's what we know about the final day. At 6:45 a.m., the housekeeper found Isabel in the conservatory. She was wearing one of Eleanor's robes, sipping tea, writing in a leather-bound journal. When asked if she needed anything, she said softly, "I need peace, but I'm not sure where to find it." At 9:10 a.m., Nathan left the estate without telling anyone. Security footage shows him returning just after 11:30, with a bottle of scotch and a folded piece of paper tucked under his arm. At 1 p.m., Adrian received a call. No one knows from whom, but his face according to the sommelier who brought him lunch, went ashen like a man who'd been sentenced. At 4:15 p.m., a guest reported hearing shouting near the West Wing. No one could identify the voices. At 5:06 p.m., the fire alarm went off. By 5:24 p.m., flames had engulfed the bridal suite. Isabel was found unconscious, severely burned. Adrian was found with a single gunshot wound to the chest, self-inflicted, the coroner ruled. And in Nathan's room, a typed letter with a signature at the bottom. I did what I had to. I couldn't let her go through with it. Nathan. It looked like a murder-suicide, wrapped in jealousy and regret. Isabel remained in a coma for 36 hours before dying of complications from smoke inhalation and internal bleeding. Nathan was arrested at a nearby gas station, covered in soot, half drunk, and trembling. He confessed, but not everything added up. The gun had no fingerprints. The fire was started with accelerant Nathan had no access to. And most importantly, the signature on the confession didn't match any prior samples. And yet, the wedding was called off. The bride was dead. And the groom? He left more questions than answers. The Varnier name was on every headline. But behind the spectacle was a far darker truth. Someone had engineered this. Someone who stood to gain everything. Diving into the mysterious new will Isabel drafted before her death. It was the kind of document that could rewrite history and erase guilt. The fire had barely cooled when the questions started burning. Why did Isabel change her will? Why didn't anyone know? And most haunting of all, what did she uncover in the days before her death that made her rewrite everything? The investigators hadn't even finished clearing the debris when a slim, black folder was pulled from the ashes of her suite, charred around the edges. The wax seal mostly intact. Inside, a partially scorched legal document. Isabel's amended last will and testament. It hadn't been filed. It hadn't been signed by a witness. But it was real, and it changed everything. The original will, drafted by Isabel at 24, left the estate divided evenly among her siblings. Clara, Nathan, and Miles would each receive a third of the assets. The vineyards, the London townhouse, the offshore trust in Geneva. But this new version, the amended document gave 60% to Clara, 25% to a Mr. Adrian Blake, fiancé, 10% to a future heir unnamed, and 5% to a non-profit that didn't exist before last month. Nathan's name? Nowhere. Not even in the fine print. It stunned the family, especially because the non-profit, the Eleanor Trust, was filed only days before Isabel's death. Registered in Nevada. No known address. No board of directors. But listed one contact. A woman named Madeline Ainsworth. British. No known connection to the family. Not on the wedding guest list. Not mentioned in any family correspondence. She had, however, checked into a hotel in Napa Valley 2 days before the fire and disappeared the day after. The investigators now had more than a murder-suicide on their hands. They had a conspiracy. Forensics examined the document. The ink was intact enough to confirm its origin. Handwriting analysts agreed it was Isabel's. Not a forgery. But the date? The signature read September 10th. The fire happened September 12th. That meant she had finalized this just 2 days before everything went up in flames. Why the secrecy? Why the sudden shift? And what, if anything, did Adrian know? Meanwhile, Nathan's confession was beginning to fall apart. His lawyer, Elena Torres, pressed hard. The confession was typed. No physical fingerprints. No eyewitnesses. And most importantly, Nathan didn't benefit from Isabel's death. He was removed from the will. That makes no sense. Prosecutors countered. Motives aren't always financial. Sometimes they're personal. But Elena knew better. She pushed the court to delay charges until forensics on the gun and the fire accelerant were complete. The lab results came back 1 week later. The accelerant was a rare industrial-grade compound, not sold publicly. And the gun? Wiped clean. No prints. Serial number filed off. It had all the markings of a professional hit. Behind closed doors, Clara was crumbling. She'd just inherited the lion's share of the estate, on paper. But public suspicion made her toxic. A media storm painted her as the cold sister, the calculating heir, the Ice Queen, who gained the most from her sister's death. She refused interviews, but the staff whispered. They said she was on the phone constantly in the days before the wedding, and that she'd been spotted slipping a manila envelope to Adrian just 24 hours before the fire. She denied it, but investigators weren't convinced, especially after they discovered her flight history. Clara had flown to Nevada 5 days before the wedding, returning the next evening. The same day, the Eleanor Trust was founded. Then came the twist no one expected. A voicemail surfaced, left by Isabel, time-stamped the morning before the fire. "Clara, I know what you did. I'm not afraid of you, but I won't let you win. You don't get to decide who I become, or who I love. The new will is done. If anything happens to me, tell the truth. All of it." It hit the courtroom like a bomb. Clara's lawyers argued it was out of context. Emotional, not proof of guilt. But the public didn't care. Isabel's voice was enough to split the narrative wide open. The Golden Child was no longer a tragic victim. She was a woman surrounded by wolves. As for Adrian, his body was cremated quickly, per his mother's request. No autopsy beyond the basics. The gunshot was clean through the chest. Authorities ruled it suicide, but the angle was odd, too steep, and the lack of gunpowder residue raised eyebrows. Was it suicide or staged? The deeper they dug into Adrian's past, the more questions they unearthed. His business ventures were murky, his income inflated, and his name was connected, albeit loosely, to a Paris-based legal fixer firm, Marcel and Levesque, specialists in asset shielding and inheritance disputes. Suddenly, Adrian wasn't just the mysterious fiancé. He was a man with secrets. By the end of the month, what began as a family tragedy had become a transatlantic investigation. California, Nevada, Paris, London, New York. 6 different jurisdictions were now cooperating. Interpol issued a notice for Madeleine Ainsworth. Nathan was released on bail, pending further review of evidence. And Clara? She went silent. Moved to a private residence in upstate New York. Cut off communication. For a woman who had gained everything, she looked like someone waiting for the knock on the door. Money doesn't lie, but the people who move it, that's a different story. In Paris, France, October 12th, the city of light, romance, and secrets. While Napa mourned the dead and California detectives scrambled to piece together what was left of the Willoughby legacy, a quiet investigation had begun 5,600 miles away. It started with a bank transaction. Small, routine, missable. But to someone watching closely, it was a beacon. A $9,100 wire transfer had been routed through Banque Grevin, a discreet private bank headquartered in Paris. The name on the account? Ainsworth Holdings. The initials matched only one person, Madeleine Ainsworth. The woman listed as the sole contact for the Eleanor Trust, the shadowy nonprofit set up just before Isabel Willoughby's death. Interpol now had its first real lead. Detective Lucien Arnaud of the French National Police had seen her share of international laundering cases. This one felt different. "Too clean," she muttered, scanning the transaction records. The wire came from a shell company based in Cyprus. Another transfer followed the next day, this time from an account in the Cayman Islands. The recipient account had been opened with fake documents, but the trail still left a footprint. All paths led to a chic corner office in the 16th arrondissement of Paris, home to Marcel and Levesque, a boutique legal consultancy known for its discretion, tax advisory services, and silence. Lucien paid them a visit. Inside the office, glass walls reflected the cloudy Paris sky. A receptionist glanced up at Lucien, her badge displayed like a loaded weapon. "We don't discuss client matters." Lucien slid a photo of Adrian Blake across the counter. "What about this man? He ever come through your doors?" The woman hesitated. Just for a second. It was enough. Later that evening, Lucien received an unmarked envelope at her precinct. Inside was a single business card. No note, just a name. Julien Varese, a partner at Marcel and Levesque, known in the legal underworld as the locksmith, a man who specialized in unlocking hidden wealth, particularly in the murky realms of international inheritance. Julien wasn't easy to find, but his digital footprint betrayed him. A recent check-in on a dating app, geotagged near the Place Vendôme. Lucienne set a trap. She waited near a popular wine bar, dressed as casually as the clientele. When Julien arrived, wearing a beige trench coat and Cartier glasses, she walked up to him as if they were old friends. You really should be more careful with who you swipe right on. The blood drained from his face. Within an hour, he was in a holding room, and he was talking. Julien claimed he never met Adrian Blake in person, but he did help process an expedited beneficiary shift for a client, code for rewriting a will. The name Isabel Willoughby wasn't on any of the documents, but the alias Isla Warren was. Lucienne pulled up a file photo of Isabel from her college days. Julien nodded slowly. That's her. He described the transaction. A woman arrived in Paris 3 weeks before her death. She was emotional, determined, and looking to bypass her family's control over the estate. She wanted a new will drafted immediately. She said her life depended on it. Julien arranged for the legal paperwork, but he also noticed something off. She wasn't alone. A British woman was with her. Said she was an advisor. Tall, red-haired, sounded like Oxford or Cambridge. Her name was Madeline? Something like that. Back in California, Clara's world was closing in. The press had caught wind of the Paris connection. Headlines screamed. Rolled up newspaper, sister's fortune traced to French legal firm tied to murdered fiancé. Paparazzi camped outside her gated estate. Social media dissected every grainy image of her entering or leaving court. Clara responded with a press release. I had no knowledge of Isabel's activities in Paris. I have never met Madeleine Ainsworth. I had no involvement in the creation of the Eleanor Trust. It didn't help. Then came the subpoena. Authorities in California, Nevada, and now France demanded Clara's financial records and travel logs. They wanted every detail of her mysterious trip to Nevada days before the fire. She refused to testify, citing mental distress. Meanwhile, Nathan was rebuilding his credibility. His lawyer, Elena Torres, hired a private forensic accountant, Maggie Liu. Maggie discovered something damning, a hidden routing slip buried in the original trust documents. It showed that shortly before Isabel's death, an external firm, Brayton and Company, operating out of London, had requested access to Willoughby family asset summaries. And the request was approved by someone using Nathan's credentials. Only, Nathan hadn't signed anything. His digital signature had been forged. Even more shocking, Brayton and Company had ties to none other than the Eleanor Trust. It wasn't just inheritance fraud. It was identity theft. Interpol now considered Isabel's death part of a larger transatlantic criminal enterprise, a web spun with forged documents, ghost companies, and manipulated relationships. But what drove Isabel to Paris? Why trust a stranger like Madeleine Ainsworth? And how did Adrian Blake fit into the puzzle? Maggie found one more clue. A bank receipt, dated 2 days before the fire, from an ATM in Paris. The name on the card used, Adrian Blake. That meant he was there, despite claims he never left the States. He had lied. Again, as Lucienne returned to her office that night, she scribbled one word across her notes. Why? Why stage a murder-suicide? Why leave so many trails? And why did a woman like Isabel, strong, brilliant, cautious, trust people who would ultimately betray her? Answers were coming, but they would demand a price, one that another Willoughby might have to pay. As the hunt for Madeleine Ainsworth intensifies, secrets from her past in Oxford surface, along with a deadly connection to another high-profile inheritance death. She had no birth certificate, no paper trail, only a series of aliases and a reputation that traveled faster than her passport. Oxford, England, November 3rd. The autumn air carried a chill as sharp as the questions now echoing through the Willoughby case. In a high-security digital forensics lab in downtown London, Interpol analyst Sarah Moyes stared at a name that had surfaced again and again, like a ghost refusing to disappear. Madeleine Ainsworth. But there was one problem. Madeleine Ainsworth didn't exist. Not officially, not legally, not in any country. The lead had come from France, from Julien Vareze's confession. He described her vividly, mid-40s, British accent, educated, red hair like fire under a street lamp. Fluent in finance, law, psychology. And always careful. Too careful. Sarah dug deeper. Using voice print analysis and passport activity cross-referenced with airline records, she linked Madeleine Ainsworth to a woman known in British intelligence as the red-haired ghost. Real name? Unknown, but suspected in at least 3 high-stakes estate manipulation schemes spanning Monaco, Boston, and Dubai. In each case, the pattern was the same. 1. Befriend or seduce the heir. 2. Gain power of attorney or access to estate documents. 3. Forge legal transfers, always through a fake philanthropic trust. 4. Disappear the moment money changed hands. The beneficiaries? Always shell companies. The result? Always death. The most damning case? The Kingsley Estate. Oxford, 2017. Lord Alfred Kingsley, a reclusive British aristocrat and rare manuscript collector, died of an apparent overdose just weeks after amending his will. The new version left everything, not to his children, but to a charity called the Athena Foundation, run by an advisor named Margaret Ashford. Surveillance photos from the funeral captured a red-haired woman near the back, wearing sunglasses and a vintage veil. Sarah ran facial recognition. The probability match to Madeleine Ainsworth? 87%. Same voice. Same digital footprint. Same method. Different name. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Clara Willoughby's world was unraveling. Under immense pressure from prosecutors, she was now considered a person of interest. Nathan's legal team accused her of manipulating Isabel through emotional and financial coercion. Clara denied it all, publicly, anyway. But privately, she was folding. A source close to her leaked pages from her private journal to the San Francisco Tribune. In them, Clara described a woman in Paris who knew exactly what I needed and how to get it done. She didn't name Madeleine, but the timing lined up with Isabel's trip. More damningly, Clara had transferred $150,000 to a consulting firm in Geneva, just 1 week before the will was changed. The firm's only listed employee, M. Ainsworth. Detective Lucienne Arnaud, coordinating with British authorities, now had a trail to follow. She traveled to Oxford herself, meeting with Dr. Helen Grafton, a retired professor of international finance who once mentored a brilliant young grad student from Cambridge named Margot Ashby. Helen remembered her vividly. She was extraordinary, brilliant, but cold, calculating. There was something performative about her charm, like she was auditioning for a life that didn't exist. She showed Lucienne an old class photo. There she was, front row. Red hair, intelligent eyes. Same woman from the Kingsley surveillance. Same woman described by Julian Varese. Same woman behind the Eleanor Trust. Lucienne asked the obvious question. Where is she now? Helen's answer was immediate. She doesn't stay anywhere for long. But if she's in England, she'll be at the Cotswolds. There's a manor there, Ashcroft Hall, owned by an old friend of hers. They share secrets. That night, British police executed a search warrant on Ashcroft Hall. It was empty, but not untouched. In the guest quarters, they found a shattered glass of wine, a burned passport in the fireplace, issued under the name Marian Allen, and in a drawer, a torn photo of Isabel Willoughby with a hand-scrawled note on the back. She was the only one I didn't want to destroy. Lucienne held the photo like a relic from a war. Proof not just of proximity, but emotion. It was clear now. Madeleine, Margot, whatever her real name was, knew Isabel deeply. Whether she loved her, used her, or both was still unknown. Back in Napa, Nathan sat quietly in his attorney's office as new evidence poured in. Maggie Lou laid it out on the table. Nathan, this wasn't just a forged will. This was a global financial trap. Your name, your reputation, your identity, they used everything. And they nearly got away with it. He felt hollow. Isabel had trusted someone who wore masks for a living. A woman who may have orchestrated her final days. But what hurt the most wasn't that Isabel died. It was that Nathan still didn't know if she'd been trying to protect him or frame him. A week later, Sarah Moyes pinged Lucienne with a message. New alert. Passport flagged at JFK. Woman traveling under alias M. Allard. One-way ticket to Morocco. Red hair. Traveling alone. Interpol moved fast, but she never boarded the flight. Instead, security footage showed her entering the terminal, then slipping into a service corridor. An hour later, a blonde woman in sunglasses walked out the other side. She was gone. Again. From Napa to Oxford, the red-haired ghost had left her fingerprints on everything. But not her face, not her voice, not her real name. She was a phantom in the machine, a puppet master pulling strings from behind red hair and charm. And though every clue brought investigators closer, she was always one step ahead. One step behind Isabel, and possibly one step away from her next target. There are things the desert keeps buried. Not just bones, but secrets no one was ever meant to dig up. Ely, Nevada, 1 year before Isabel's death. On the edge of the high desert, in a county with more ghosts than residents, a silver 4Runner pulled up to a weather-beaten cabin. The kind of place that didn't show up on GPS. No paved road, no neighbors for miles. Just sagebrush, wind, and a history no one had talked about in years. Inside the cabin, Clara Willoughby stood at the threshold, her phone shaking in her hand. She didn't text, didn't call. She just stared at the door. She hadn't been back here since the night that changed her life. Now, Napa, California. Nathan scrolled through Clara's subpoenaed phone records. One call stood out. May 2nd, a number in rural Nevada. No follow-up, no text, just 1 minute and 42 seconds of silence. Lucienne Arnault had flagged it immediately. I traced the coordinates, she said. It's a family-owned cabin once registered to your Uncle Peter. He left it to Isabel in 2012. Nathan blinked. Isabel never mentioned it. Lucienne nodded grimly. Clara did. She visited it last year. Alone. Back in Ely, Lucienne and local deputy Carla Vasquez arrived at the cabin with a warrant. The interior was stripped bare. No furniture, no heat, no signs of recent occupancy. But in the floorboards beneath the fireplace, they found something that didn't belong. A sealed envelope labeled Isabel. Only if something happens to me. A burned sonogram photo, half-scorched. A flash drive taped under a loose floorboard. Lucienne felt the weight of it before she even plugged it in. Whatever this place was, it wasn't just a hideaway. It was a confession box. Inside the flash drive was a single audio file. Lucienne hit play. If you're hearing this, I'm dead, or missing, or worse. Either way, this story doesn't start with me. It starts with Clara, and a lie I let her tell. The voice was unmistakable. Isabel. Her tone was calm, but threaded with heartbreak. She told me she was pregnant, that she needed space. Nevada was her retreat, her escape. But that wasn't why she came here. I followed her once. She didn't know. She wasn't meeting a doctor or even resting. She met with a woman. Red hair. British. They argued for hours inside this cabin. I didn't know who she was at the time, but I do now. She called her Margot. Lucienne froze. So did Deputy Vasquez. Clara had always insisted the pregnancy was real, that she'd lost the baby early and didn't want to talk about it. Nathan had accepted it. Grief can twist people up. But this changed everything. Back in Napa, Lucienne confronted Clara. She denied it at first, claimed the pregnancy was real. That Isabel's recording was the result of emotional breakdowns and jealous paranoia. But when Lucienne played the audio, Clara's mask cracked. She sat in silence for a long time before whispering, "It wasn't just me. She was the one who invited Margot into our lives." Flashback, Paris, 2 years ago. Clara and Isabel were in the final stretch of their engagement. They were staying at Hotel de Crillon in Paris. Isabel had come to speak at a conference on transatlantic estate law. That's where she met Margot, going by the name Ainsley Morgan, posing as a researcher from Cambridge. Charming, brilliant, dangerous. Isabel had told Clara about her, described her as enchanting but odd. They exchanged numbers. The next day, Isabel invited her to lunch. And that lunch changed everything. Clara, watching from across the room, said it was like watching someone fall under hypnosis. She'd never seen Isabel look at anyone that way, not even her. Back in the present, Nathan tried to process the tangled emotions. His sister had been manipulated, possibly seduced, possibly complicit. Maggie Lou offered a harsh truth. This woman, Margot, Madeline, whatever name she's using, she didn't just forge the will. She rewrote the whole dynamic of this family, using love as leverage, using Clara's jealousy, using Isabel's ambition. But why the cabin? Why the envelope? Nathan opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter in Isabel's looping script. If I disappear, Clara's involved. Not alone, but involved. And if the will ever changes after May 12th, it's not mine. I would never do that to Nathan, or to the truth. Signed, Isabel Willoughby. Suddenly, the stakes shifted. Isabel knew the will was going to be forged. She knew she was being watched. Used. Stalked, perhaps. But why didn't she leave? Why didn't she go to the police? Lucienne offered the chilling answer. Because she thought she could outplay them. She'd underestimated Margot. Underestimated Clara. And now, the lies from Nevada were bleeding into the legal mess in Napa. The Willoughby estate was under court-ordered freeze again. Nathan was suing for rightful heir status. Clara was being indicted for conspiracy and obstruction. And somewhere, probably under another name, Margot was watching. But one detail still haunted Lucienne. The burned sonogram wasn't fake. It belonged to someone, not Clara, and the records showed no OB/GYN appointments under Clara's name in any state. So who was the real mother? And more importantly, who was the father? Every document tells a story. The most dangerous ones tell too. London, England, present day. The air was damp and thick with city noise as Detective Lucienne Arnaud stepped out of the cab in West London. The rain had just stopped, leaving puddles glowing beneath the flicker of antique street lamps. She had crossed an ocean for this, following a ghost named Margot and the lie that now smelled like blood. She wasn't here for Isabel anymore. She was here for the truth behind the sonogram. Lucienne pressed the brass doorbell of a narrow brick flat. A moment later, the door creaked open. "Ms. Eileen Rowe?" Lucienne asked. The elderly woman nodded slowly. "I was told you'd be coming. That American boy rang me up. Said it was about a baby." Flashback, 37 years ago. Eileen Rowe had been a midwife for nearly 5 decades. She'd seen births in hospitals, homes, even one in the back of a black cab. But the one she remembered most happened in a gated cottage outside Surrey. The woman had no name, no ID, just cash, and fear in her eyes. "Call me Margot," she had whispered. She was in labor, alone, no father, no family, only a bodyguard in the hallway and a sealed envelope she handed to Eileen before delivering. Inside, a forged birth certificate already filled out. Eileen didn't ask questions. She was paid not to. Now London. Eileen shuffled through a tin box of yellow documents. She handed Lucienne an envelope, aged but preserved. "It's not a copy," Eileen said. "It's the original. I never filed it." Lucienne unfolded the certificate. Name of child, Clara Arlette Willoughby. Mother, Margot Olivia Holloway. Father, Peter Reginald Willoughby. Lucienne's breath caught. "Peter," she whispered. "Not Isabel's father, Nathan's." Which made Clara Nathan's half-sister. But if this was true, it also meant the entire will, built around bloodline succession, had been manipulated from the start. A child born in secrecy, a document never filed, and a lie buried in the name of legacy. Back in Napa, Nathan stood frozen as Lucienne laid out the documents across the oak table of their late mother's law office. His mouth moved before words came out. "That means..." Clara knew. "She's not my cousin. She's my sister." Lucienne nodded. "Half. But yes." Maggie Lou leaned forward. This would explain the obsession, the resentment, the manipulation. She wanted everything you had because she believed she was just as entitled. Nathan clenched his fists. And Isabel? She didn't know. Lucienne shrugged. Hard to say. If she found out late in the game, like when she followed Clara to Nevada, it would have changed everything. It could have been the reason she was killed. Flashback, 2 weeks before Isabel's death. Isabel is sitting in her study, poring over an envelope postmarked from London. Inside, a blurry copy of the same birth certificate, mailed anonymously. She flips the page. Medical records, all tied to a woman named Margot Holloway. Suddenly, she understands. Clara's lies. The timing. The power struggle over the estate. The way Margot's name kept surfacing. Margot wasn't just some con artist. She was Clara's mother. And Clara was the real weapon. Now, Napa. Maggie pushed forward another piece of evidence. The forged will, dated after Isabel's death, named only direct descendants of Peter Willoughby as rightful heirs. Not cousins, not nieces, children. Legally speaking, if the birth certificate were ever validated, Clara would take everything. Nathan sat back, staring at the ceiling. All this time I thought this was about money, he muttered. Lucienne replied, it was never just about money. It was about validation, about rewriting the past. And Margot, she was playing chess long before anyone knew they were even in the game. Meanwhile, upstate New York, Margot Holloway, now living under the alias Charlotte Hughes, watched the breaking news flash across her television. Breaking, London midwife confirms forged birth certificate tied to Willoughby estate. Investigation expanding into potential fraud, identity theft, and international conspiracy. She poured herself a glass of Bordeaux and smiled faintly. You move too fast, Clara, she whispered to the empty room. You always do. Then she walked to a locked drawer and pulled out a second sonogram, dated 1 month earlier than the burned one. Different name, different date, but identical child. Margot stared at it for a long time, then lit on fire. In London, days later, Lucienne received an unmarked package at her hotel. No return address, no note. Inside, a single thumb drive and a silver necklace shaped like a swan. Lucienne plugged the drive in her laptop. Another audio file. Margot's voice, calm and articulate. Detective Arnaud, by now you know the story is bigger than the will. Bigger than Clara. It was never about inheritance. It was about blood, about what gets passed on and what should have stayed buried. They all think they're players in the story, but I'm the one who wrote it. The screen went black. Lucienne sat in silence, the necklace in her palm. Cold, heavy. Then her phone buzzed. It was Maggie. You need to get back. Now. Clara just tried to hang herself in her cell. Lucienne's heart sank. What? She left a note. It wasn't a suicide letter. It was a confession. At Sonoma County Detention Center, 3:47 a.m. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly. Everything was sterile, too quiet. Clara Willoughby lay in a hospital bed, her wrists bandaged, her lips pale. Monitors beeped at a slow, stubborn pace. But she was alive. Detective Lucienne Arnaud entered the room, her coat still wet from the early morning storm. She placed a manila folder on the side table. Inside was the note, the confession, 12 pages of handwritten chaos. Clara turned her head weakly. Is he dead? Lucienne didn't flinch. Nathan? No, he's in New York. You try to kill yourself, not him. Clara closed her eyes. That's not what I meant. 48 hours earlier, before the attempt, Clara sat alone in her cell, scrawling furiously on loose notebook paper. Each word was a bleed. Each paragraph an incision into the family's fragile history. The confession wasn't linear. It was layered, like a nesting doll of resentment, betrayal, and cold ambition. In page 1, she recounted her mother's voice, always whispering from behind locked doors. They took it from us, Clara. He took it. Peter gave everything to the daughter who looked like a painting. But you were born in shadows. That's where real power grows. In page 4, Clara admitted she knew about Isabel's suspicions. She had followed her to Nevada. She'd seen the meeting at the motel. Isabel confronting Margot. The shouting, the slap. But she swore she didn't kill her. I watched Isabel walk out alive. She was shaking. Margot was calm. Too calm. That's when I knew something had been planned. I wasn't the architect. I was the wrecking ball. Sonoma County now. Lucienne read aloud from the confession as Clara watched her through half-lidded eyes. I didn't poison Isabel, but I delivered the wine. Lucienne paused. That alone could bury you, Clara. Clara gave a small, bitter smile. Good. Then dig deep. Nathan was never supposed to take the fall. He was a diversion. Margot always said the best way to win is to lose out loud. Lucienne glanced up. What does that mean? She framed him so she could disappear. Flashback, Paris, 6 months earlier. Margot and Clara were walking the Seine. Clara was tense. Margot was glowing. When this is over, you'll have the whole estate, Margot said, sipping red wine from a travel flask. And you? I'll be dead. Figuratively. You're faking your death? No, darling. I'm trading it. Clara blinked. For what? Margot's eyes narrowed, cold and glittering. For freedom. That's the only thing money can't buy unless you earn it through chaos. Back to present. Maggie Lou entered the hospital room, holding a printed page from an international banking wire. The Swiss account. Clara withdrew funds 2 days before Isabel's death. $500,000. Where did it go? Clara laughed. I paid the ghost. Lucienne leaned in. What ghost? Clara replied, voice low. The woman who buried the real Margot. New Orleans, 1 year ago. A woman named Cécile Dufresne, a struggling French theater actress, was hired to assume Margot's identity at public functions. She mimicked her voice, her posture, even wore her perfume. She was promised $500,000 and a new passport. She was found dead in a river 10 months later, missing her fingerprints. At Sonoma County Jail, evidence room, Lucienne reviewed the last 3 pages of Clara's confession. She'd written about the night of the murder-suicide attempt, the dinner, the broken wine bottle, the blood on her dress. But something new appeared. A map, drawn by hand. A vineyard in Calistoga. A well. A key buried beneath a tree marked with a circle. Clara had written, this is where it ends, where she buried the original will. The one Peter signed before he died. The one that would have changed everything. I kept it hidden because even I couldn't live with that kind of truth. Napa, hours later. Lucienne, Maggie, and a forensic team dug beneath the twisted oak tree Clara had circled. It took 20 minutes to hit metal. An antique tin box, rusted shut. Inside, a will, dated 6 months before the one in dispute. A DNA test with Peter's name and Margot's. A photo of a newborn baby labeled C. And finally, a cassette tape. Lucienne played it in her car. To my daughter Clara, Peter's voice said, thick with sorrow. If this reaches you, it means the truth couldn't be silenced forever. I knew what Margot was. I knew what she did. And I left you out of the will to protect you. Not from the world, but from her. I'm sorry. Lucienne stared at the road ahead, her knuckles white on the wheel. The truth had finally arrived, but it came too late for Isabel, too late for Nathan, and far too late for Clara. At Calistoga, California, early morning mist. The fog hung like a secret. Thick, silent, unwilling to lift. Detective Lucien Arnaud stood at the edge of the vineyard, a shovel in one hand and the recovered tin box in the other. Nearby, crime scene techs dusted the lid for prints, but Lucien already knew this wasn't about fingerprints. It was about legacy, lies, and the war between the dead and the living. Inside that rusted box was Peter Willoughby's original will, signed, notarized, witnessed. It left the estate not to Margot, not to any of the power-hungry heirs, but to Clara. Inside the box, beside the will was the cassette, Peter's solemn voice confessing everything. The betrayal, the affair, the cover-up. She drugged me the night I was supposed to change the will. Margot, she threatened to burn it all down if I didn't play her game. The final paragraph of the document read, like prophecy, if this will is discovered after my death, it should supersede all others. My estate shall go to my daughter, Clara Isabel Willoughby. May she find peace in a family that never deserved her. Lucienne looked at the words, stunned. Clara had been telling the truth all along. But if Clara was the heir, then who wanted her out of the picture? Las Vegas, Nevada, surveillance footage revisited. Maggie Lou had been combing through security footage from the Willoughby Foundation Gala. It was the last time all the key players were together. There, she found something previously missed. Margot, in a shimmering gold dress, slipped a velvet envelope into a man's pocket. A man named Julian Drake, an old friend of Peter's. Also, a disgraced estate lawyer from London, disbarred for document tampering. He'd gone completely off-grid 6 weeks after Isabel's death. Back in Calistoga, the hidden room, Clara's map had shown one more secret, a room beneath the vineyard house. Lucien and a locksmith pride opened the rusted hatch under the floorboards. A spiral staircase descended into darkness. There, under low stone arches and dust-choked air, was a storage room filled with copies of documents, falsified wills, ledger sheets, contracts with altered signatures. At the center, a photograph of Peter and Julian, arms over each other's shoulders, standing in front of a chateau in southern France. In red ink, the deal was made here. Paris, France, the Chateau Belcourt. Lucien and Maggie flew to Paris within 36 hours. The chateau had recently been purchased by a shell company linked to a Cayman Islands trust. And who signed the trust documents? Julian Drake. A butler confirmed that a Mr. Drake and a Ms. Renee Moreau, a known alias of Margot, had been living on and off at the estate for nearly a year. Margot had faked her disappearance. She hadn't vanished. She had migrated. Lucien stared at the chateau from the gates. It was pristine, untouched by scandal. But she knew this was the eye of the storm. Margot's web. Back in California, the DA reviewed Clara's confession, the recovered will, and the forensic evidence from the vineyard. Charges against Clara were dropped. But by then, she was no longer speaking. She hadn't spoken since the night in the hospital when she whispered, "I was never supposed to survive this." Lucien paid her a visit at the psychiatric facility in Santa Rosa. "Clara," she said gently, "you were right." Clara didn't respond. Lucien placed Peter's cassette player on the table and hit play. Peter's voice filled the room like a ghost finally making peace with the living. When it ended, Clara looked up with glassy eyes. "Then why does it still feel like I lost?" New York. Nathan's return. Nathan was released from custody after forensic analysis confirmed that his fingerprints were not on the poisoned wine glass. But freedom didn't mean peace. He stepped out of the courthouse into a sea of cameras. Reporters yelled questions. One stood out. "Nathan, any comment on your role in your sister's murder?" He froze, then whispered, "She wasn't just my sister," and walked away. Paris. A chase begins. Interpol issued a notice for Margot and Julian, but the trail was slippery. They had vanished again, leaving behind burner phones, cleaned accounts, and a single note in Margot's signature lipstick red. Truth is overrated. Stories are power. Lucien stood at the edge of the chateau vineyard, the irony slicing deep. 2 vineyards, 2 daughters, one alive, one buried, and a woman who would burn down the world to keep her secrets hidden. Back in California, the will is read. Under court order, Peter Willoughby's original will was made public. In it, he not only named Clara as his sole heir, but also requested the family foundation be dissolved and its assets redirected to a mental health institute in Sonoma County, ironically, where Clara now resided. The press called it the Vineyard Will. The public called it justice. But to Lucien, it felt like an unfinished chapter. In Lucien's journal entry, there's something about the quiet between storms that feels worse than the thunder. Clara sleeps most days now. Nathan's gone silent. The estate is tied up in probate hell. And Margot is still out there, unpunished, untouched, and undoubtedly planning her next move. But justice isn't always a verdict. Sometimes it's just being seen, heard, remembered. And I'll remember them all. The ones who died, the ones who disappeared, and the ones who made it out with nothing but their name. In Paris, France, a studio apartment in Montmartre, the woman behind the makeup mirror was no longer Margot Willoughby. Her dye-blonde hair now fell in a brunette bob. Her cheekbones were softened, her British accent laced with a Parisian slur. She was Renee Moreau now, a retired stage actress in love with French wines and long walks in the Marais. But inside the drawer beneath her makeup palettes and old theater scripts sat a passport, Margot's, expired, smudged with ash. Next to it, a faded photo of a baby girl in Peter's arms, scribbled on the back, Clara, 1995. Napa Valley. Margot stared at her reflection, then closed the drawer slowly. "Time to go," she whispered. Back in California, a parcel arrived at Lucien's office. Unmarked, no return address. Inside, an antique urn, and a note. She's yours now. M. Lucien didn't need forensics to guess. The ashes were Isabel's. Margot had kept them, hidden them, and now she was taunting them. A private ceremony was held in Napa. Just Lucien, Clara, and Nathan. No eulogies, no reporters. Just a woman who deserved more than a lie carved into marble. As the wind scattered Isabel's ashes over the vines, Clara whispered, "I still hear her singing when I dream." Maggie Lou had been digging into theater records from the 1980s. A tip had led her to a crumbling estate in Hampstead, once home to a stage company called the Iron Crown. One name appeared again and again in the cast lists. Margaret Carter. Trained at RADA. Vanished in 1991. Her last known role? Lady Macbeth. It wasn't until Maggie compared headshots from Margaret Carter with press photos of Margot Willoughby that the pieces clicked. Margot hadn't just disappeared and reinvented herself. She had auditioned for life itself, built a new identity from the stage up. The ashes had shaken her. But for the first time since her arrest, Clara requested to see Lucien. They met in the Institute garden, rain tapping on the plastic canopy. Clara held the forged will in one hand, Peter's cassette in the other. "I know what she's doing," Clara said, voice calm. "She's waiting for the story to die, so she can rise again as someone else. She's done it before. She'll do it again." Lucien studied her face. There was clarity there now. Not peace, but purpose. "She plays the long game," Clara continued. "But so can I." Interpol flagged a name match. A Renee Moreau was booked on a flight from Paris to Buenos Aires under a forged passport. But she never boarded. She'd slipped again, leaving behind a suitcase in her Paris flat, its contents chilling. A wig, a flash drive labeled Red Queen, and a screenplay titled Inheritance. Scene 1, a woman burns a will. Scene 2, she becomes someone else. Scene 3, the daughter learns to kill. Maggie sent it straight to Lucien. "She's mocking us," Lucien said. But Claire saw something else in it. "She's not mocking. She's rehearsing." At Texas, in Amarillo, a small-time private investigator named Leo Burdett reached out after seeing news of the Willoughby scandal. "I know that woman," he said. "She came through 2 years ago, called herself Elena Hart, said she was scouting for a film, paid in cash, and she asked a lot of questions about wills." He sent surveillance stills. The hair was different, but the eyes? Undeniable. Margot had been testing her next performance before the last one had ended. But why Texas? The clue came from Clara, who remembered one of Isabel's old letters mentioning a family ranch in Lubbock. Property Peter had sold off, but never erased from the trust paperwork. Margot wasn't just escaping. She was circling back. Lucien returned to the original Willoughby estate in Calistoga. She walked the property slowly, this time not for clues, but for silence. She stopped by the charred rose garden where Isabel had last been seen before her death. There in the soil was something unexpected, a burned scrap of silk with a pearl button still attached. The dress Isabel had worn the night of the fire had been listed as missing. Was it staged? Was she trying to flee too? Lucien pressed the evidence bag to her chest. Whatever had happened that night wasn't what they thought. Clara petitioned the court to establish a foundation in Isabel's name using the estate funds. Not for vanity, but for something deeper, the Lost Daughters Initiative, dedicated to women manipulated by family trauma, financial abuse, and coercion. "I can't undo what she did," Clara told the judge. "But I can be the end of her story." Margot's influence was fading. But like all great actresses, she had one final act, and it would take everything to stop her from performing it. Dusk fell over the Napa vineyard. A woman in dark sunglasses and a headscarf stood just beyond the gate, watching. She held a long envelope. Inside, a new will, dated just 2 months ago, and a note. "The story isn't over. M." Lucien reviewed security footage an hour later. The woman had vanished. Again, but this time, she left behind her stage directions. Rebirth isn't for the innocent. It's for the ones who survived the fire and learned to wield it. Back in London, it began with a podcast episode. Obscure. French language. a deep dive series on European identity theft and theatrical deception. A voice low, deliberate, spoke in soft, commanding tones about the freedom of becoming. Maggie Lou was listening by accident. Halfway through the third episode, she dropped her coffee. The voice was unmistakable. Margot Willoughby, under a new name. Solene Marichal, this time a voice coach turned life strategist, offering cryptic advice on reinvention. Each episode hinted at real crimes. Buried will contests, burned estates, daughters locked in sanitariums. Margot wasn't hiding anymore. She was teaching. Clara sat beneath a vine-covered trellis with a notebook in her lap. She wasn't sketching. She was mapping. Timelines, identities, known aliases, cross-referencing Margot's movements with unsolved fraud cases, real estate transfers, theater companies long shut down. Every persona was a performance. Every city is set. Every man, Peter included, a prop. She's not on the run, Clara told Lucien. She's building her myth. Every disappearance feeds it. Lucien nodded slowly. And every myth ends the same way, in fire or fame. Clara looked up. Then let's make her choose. At New York, Maggie launched a trap, publicly. She announced a staged reading of a new play in Manhattan, The Actress Vanishes, based on an anonymous true crime manuscript. One night only. Invite only. Recorded for streaming. She dropped hints on theater forums and obscure podcasts. Just enough for the right ghost to hear. Margot loved the stage. She loved applause even more. Lucien approved the plan but warned, if she comes, she'll come armed, with a smile, a story, and maybe a body. At Paris, in a shadowed apartment near Bastille, Margot rehearsed her lines. She recited Clara's courtroom transcript like poetry, reenacted Peter's final voicemail, memorized Isabel's letters, not because she missed them, because she needed them, as costumes, as currency. She stared at herself in the mirror. Forgive me, she whispered, not to anyone in particular, but with practiced elegance. A perfect tear slid down. She was ready. Back in California, the night before the reading, Clara walked the vineyard alone. Nathan trailed behind, silent. He had told her the truth now, that he had seen Margot the night of the fire, barefoot in the vineyard, watching the house burn. She smiled, he whispered, like it was art. Clara turned. She's coming tomorrow. He nodded. How do you know? Because she wants to see me, Clara said. Watch me play the version of her she never could. Nathan didn't ask if she was afraid. She wasn't. Not anymore. In New York, the theater was small. Black walls, dim lights, intimate seating, cameras hidden in the corners, federal agents in the wings. Clara waited backstage, the script in her hands. She wasn't playing a part. She was the part. Lucien stood beside her, badge under her blazer, eyes on the front row. And then, Margot arrived. Chin high, hair silver, pearls at her throat. Applause followed her like a ghost. She took her seat and smiled. As the performance began, the lights dimmed. Clara stepped on stage and spoke the opening line. She died before the will was signed, or so they said. Margot didn't blink. Scene by scene, Clara unspooled the tale. The forged inheritance, the murder-suicide, the false confession. She played herself, her mother, her father, even Margot. The audience was silent, rapt, confused. Margot leaned forward as if admiring her own reflection. Then, in the final scene, Clara turned to her directly. And in the end, the villain didn't flee. She watched. She clapped. She wanted to be immortalized. The house lights rose. Everyone turned to Margot. But she was already standing, smiling, applauding. And then, she bowed. Federal agents moved in. Quietly, quickly. But Margot didn't resist. She handed over her forged passport, her phone, her monogrammed purse. Lucien approached. You didn't come to run, she said. Margot smiled, eyes gleaming. I came to watch my story told the way it deserves. Lucien shook her head. No, you came because you wanted someone to catch you, someone worthy. Margot tilted her head, amused. I always said Clara had potential. Later that night, a prison cell in Manhattan. Margot removed her earrings, her lipstick, her mask. Alone, but not for long. A letter arrived in her cell the next morning. No return address, just a pressed white rose and a note. "This isn't over. See?" She smiled. The curtain hadn't dropped. Not yet. As the original voice behind the mystery resurfaces, a new layer of betrayal threatens to undo everything Clara believes. What if Margot wasn't the only liar? Every story has a ghostwriter. Sometimes it's the one who never spoke until now. In Paris, France, a box of ashes and ink. A courier arrived at Clara's vineyard 3 weeks after Margot's arrest. No return address. French postmark. Inside, a charred wooden box lined with velvet. Tucked beneath it, 3 delicate envelopes sealed in red wax. Isabel's handwriting. Clara's hands trembled. She hadn't seen that cursive since the funeral. She locked the office door before unfolding the first letter. A gust of wind rattled the shutters. The vines outside moaned in the evening breeze. She read the header. "To my true daughter, whomever you become." Fountain pen letter I, truths I buried. Isabel's words flowed like whispered confessions from the grave. She spoke of her marriage to Peter, how it had been arranged more than chosen, how she'd fallen for his brilliance, then lived with his absence, a man addicted to secrets, and then how she met Margot. She came in like a breeze through stained glass, beautiful, fractured, impossible to hold. I thought I was saving her. I didn't realize she was rewriting me. They had an affair. Not the scandal, but the aftermath broke Isabel. Margot grew possessive, manipulative. She wanted more than love. She wanted a legacy, a life that wasn't hers. She whispered that our daughters didn't deserve what we'd built, that we could start over, just us. And for one terrifying moment, I believed her. Fountain pen letter 2, the Phoenix draft. The second letter was shorter but sharper. Isabel had discovered Margot's early plan, one she'd called the Phoenix draft, a blueprint for identity erasure. It involved switching wills, forging signatures, and torching the past, literally and legally. Margot had pitched it as a performance piece. Isabel was horrified, but Peter wasn't. He admired her intellect, said she had vision, and when I tried to stop them, he reminded me that silence was the price of survival. The revised will was signed, not by Isabel, but in her name. Isabel stayed silent until the fire. When the estate burned, I knew the truth would smolder with it, unless someone, someday, lit the match again. Fountain pen letter 3, to Clara, with hope. The final letter was personal, a quiet reflection from a mother to a daughter she feared she hadn't protected enough. Isabel apologized, not for what she'd done, but what she didn't stop. "You were always meant to be stronger than us. That's why they feared you, why they tried to bury you in stories they wrote. But I see you now, Clara. You are not their ending. You are the rewrite." It ended with a final instruction. "Don't let the last chapter be theirs. If this ever reaches you, there's one more secret, one I couldn't send. Look inside the fireplace of the London flat. Behind the 4th brick." Clara didn't wait. She flew out that night. The apartment had been Margot's for a time, an artist studio near Shoreditch, filled with dusty canvases and old playbills. The fireplace sat untouched, cloaked in cobwebs. Clara pulled at the 4th brick. It slid free. Inside, a flash drive sealed in wax. Back in her hotel, she opened it on a burner laptop. The file name chilled her. Crowhurst_confession.mp4. Film frames the video. You were never supposed to know. The footage opened with Peter Willoughby. He sat in his study, the same one that burned to ash in California. He looked tired, old, guilty. "If you're watching this," he said, then Margot failed. Or I did. He confessed everything. The rewritten will, the fire plan, the manipulation. He even described staging the suicide note on Caroline's body, though he claimed she pulled the trigger first. But Isabel, she found out, and she threatened to go to the authorities. I panicked. I told Margot we needed a distraction. I never imagined Isabel would. He chokes up. She walked into the flames to stop us. He ended with this. "Clara, my Clara, if you ever learn this, I'm sorry you had to carry a name we stained. But maybe, just maybe you can cleanse it." The video cut to static. In California. The next day, Clara met with Lucien and federal prosecutors. The footage, the letters, the timeline, it all fit. Enough to reopen the case against Margot on new charges: conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice in connection to Isabel's death. But there was a catch. Margot's defense attorneys had filed for dismissal. The argument? That her arrest was based on entrapment. That her identity had never been legally verified. That Clara's play had blurred fiction with fact and prejudiced the court. The judge would hear it in 2 weeks. If they won, Margot could walk. Clara requested one last meeting. She walked into the sterile visiting room wearing black, like armor. Margot sat across from her in state-issued gray, unbothered. "Clever girl," she said. "I always knew you'd find the letters." Clara slid a photo across the table, a still from Peter's confession video. Margot's smile faltered, just slightly. "You won't get out," Clara said. "Not this time. Not after this." Margot leaned in. "Then make sure the curtain falls beautifully, Clara. After all, you're the storyteller now." As Margot's legal team fights to set her free, Clara and Lucien scramble to keep the case from unraveling. But justice has never been simple, and neither has the truth. Some people fight for justice. Others perform it. At Los Angeles County Superior Court, the courtroom was standing room only. Journalists elbowed for position. Sketch artists scrambled for angles. Family members sat stiffly behind opposing tables. Ghosts in tailored suits. On the defense side, Willoughby-Crowhurst smirking behind cat-eye glasses. On the prosecution's, Clara Willoughby, seated in the second row, jaw set like stone. It had been 18 months since the fire. Now it all came down to this. Margot's defense team opened with fire. "Your Honor," lead attorney Gabriel Hart began, "this entire prosecution hinges on flawed identity verification, digital evidence of unverifiable origin, and a coerced confession from a dying man with compromised mental faculties." He waved Peter's confession video like it was a bad script. Mr. Willoughby's statement, though dramatic, lacks forensic authentication and contradicts sworn testimony. Furthermore, the involvement of Ms. Clara Willoughby, an emotionally compromised heir, amounts to judicial theater. There were audible gasps. Clara leaned forward. Her fingers dug into the bench in front of her. "Dismiss the charges," Hart concluded, "and free my client." Lucien rose calmly. Her voice was measured, but razor-sharp. "The defense would like to pretend this is a play, but the evidence tells a much grimmer story." She presented timelines, digital metadata, flight records, and the forensic match of Margot's handwriting on the altered will. She played excerpts from Peter's confession, pausing at emotional beats for impact. This is not fiction. It's fraud, fire, and a family annihilated by greed. She finished with a photo of Isabel's burned jewelry found in Margot's Paris apartment. The dead can't testify, but they still leave clues. And justice doesn't care for your applause. The jury watched silently. An older man on the left twitched when Isabel's name was mentioned. A woman on the right wept during the video playback. A young juror near the back scribbled something in large block letters on a yellow legal pad. She knew. Incoming envelope, a surprise witness surfaced from the echoes from the fire. Just as both sides prepared closing statements, Lucien made a bold move. "Your Honor," she said, "we'd like to call an unexpected witness. A letter carrier, Michel Damas, from Lyon, France." Whispers erupted. The bailiff ushered in an older man with sunspots on his cheeks and trembling hands. Mr. Damas, through a translator, recounted delivering 3 sealed letters postmarked from Paris, dated one day after Isabel's supposed death. One had been intercepted by Margot and destroyed. The other 2? One to Clara Willoughby, one to Peter Willoughby, both hand-addressed. Isabel was alive when the will was burned. The courtroom froze. Lucien stood. No forged document, no rewritten will, no cruel confession can erase one thing. Isabel was silenced because she stood in the way. The defendant, Ms. Crowhurst, didn't just fake a legacy. She tried to erase a woman's life for it. She turned toward the jury. "You've heard the lies. Now, light a match to them." The defense rebutted coldly. "If grief were evidence, we'd all be guilty." But passion does not prove motive. Suspicion does not prove crime. This trial is smoke and mirrors. Let's not let it end in a witch hunt. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned. On the count of conspiracy to commit inheritance fraud, we find the defendant guilty. Margot blinked once. On the count of obstruction of justice in the case of Isabel Willoughby, guilty. A gasp. Clara's eyes welled. Margot looked over her shoulder. On the count of murder in the second degree, in relation to the death of Caroline Willoughby. Time stood still. Not guilty. Shock. Outrage. A ripple of confusion. Margot smiled. Just a little. Clara met Lucien outside under a gray California sky. She won, Clara whispered. She got away with it. Lucien shook her head. She got away with part of it. She'll serve time for fraud and obstruction. That buys us years. Maybe life. But not for murder, Clara said. Not for what she did to Caroline. Lucien hesitated. We can reopen that charge if new evidence surfaces. Clara's eyes narrowed. Then let's go dig. That night, Clara returned to the vineyard in France. Under candlelight, she read the third lost letter. One Margot never knew existed. One Isabel had written but never mailed. It ended with this. If the fire ever clears, and you're the one left standing, tell them who I was. Not the story they wrote. The one I lived. Clara folded the paper gently and placed it in a glass frame. She hung it above the fireplace. Everything Margot built is crumbling, but she's not done. From behind bars, she triggers one last twist that threatens Clara's life, reputation, and everything she fought to preserve. And in the final, dramatic showdown, only one woman's truth will survive. When truth is buried, it doesn't die. It waits. In Franklin Correctional Facility, upstate New York, the snow fell quietly, like the world was trying to forget. Inside the concrete walls of Franklin Correctional, Margot Crowhurst wasn't mourning. She was writing. Her letters were perfectly spaced, slanted just so, toned with apology, lacquered in poison. To whom it may concern, I am ready to tell the whole truth now, but only if my terms are met. The prison's mail room flagged the message. But Margot knew how to bypass systems. She always had. The letter reached its target, a journalist in New York who'd been chasing the Willoughby case since the day the fire went up. What she revealed next would threaten to burn down everything all over again. Margot's letter began like a memoir. I never wanted to kill anyone. I only wanted what I was promised. But by paragraph 3, it turned into something else. Isabel wasn't murdered in the way they think. Caroline didn't die by accident. And Clara Willoughby, she's not the innocent victim she pretends to be. In one stroke, Margot rewrote the narrative. She claimed that Clara was the true architect of the inheritance switch, that she'd manipulated Peter into the confession, and, worst of all, that she had motive to kill Caroline out of jealousy. The media ate it up like blood and water. Headlines erupt again. Red Circle new twist. Clara Willoughby framed Margot. Television in her own words. Crowhurst blames heiress in fiery death. Books, prison diaries, the will that killed all of them. The backlash was immediate. Clara was hounded. Paparazzi waited outside her apartment in Tribeca. Sponsors dropped her vineyard's rebranding campaign. She lost 3 major investors in 1 week. In public, she stood tall. But behind closed doors, she was unraveling. I didn't do this, she told Lucien over the phone, her voice cracking. You know I didn't. Lucien didn't answer right away. And that silence was the most terrifying thing Clara had heard since the fire. Lucien began reinvestigating Margot's claims. She looked into Clara's travel logs, the vineyard's finances, even digital voice print analysis of Peter's confession video. What she found changed everything. There was an edited version of a video. Someone had spliced lines out of context, and the original, previously believed deleted, was recovered from an old backup drive. In it, Peter's full message emerged. Clara doesn't know I'm doing this. She'll hate me for it, but I have to protect her, even from the truth. He said he'd rewritten the will himself, that Margot had tried to stop him, that Isabel had found out and vanished shortly after. Forensics had also been rerun. In Caroline's death, previously labeled an accident, new analysis showed a sedative in her system. Traces of midazolam, enough to impair her driving, had been missed in the initial toxicology report. And the bottle? Found in a vineyard storage shed. A shed only Margot had the key to. Lucienne flew to California herself, where she unearthed records of a prescription Margot had picked up in a different name just weeks before Caroline's death. Game. Set. Match. Lucienne visited Margot at Franklin. Margot wore red lipstick. Even in prison, she found vanity. You almost did it, Lucienne said. You almost convinced the world she did it. Margot shrugged. You'll never find a body, you know, she said of Isabel. That was the real trick. I took her voice. Now she'll never speak again. Lucienne leaned in. We don't need her voice. We have yours. And this time, you signed every page. She slid a document across the table. Margot's prison diary, subpoenaed and authenticated. Inside, she had confessed everything. Unwittingly, the smirk on Margot's face faded. Justice was finally served as a federal judge reopened the murder charge. This time, the evidence was airtight. The sedative, the forgeries, the letters, the digital tampering. Margot was sentenced to life without parole. Her reaction? A half smile and the whispered words, I'll live longer in legend than she ever did in truth. In Clara's vineyard, 1 year later, in the south of France, the vines were blooming again. Clara had renamed the vineyard Maison Isabelle, a tribute not just to her aunt, but to every woman silenced by wealth, power, or love turned violent. Lucienne visited for the opening. Still haunted? She asked. Always, Clara said. But I've learned something. She handed Lucienne a wine bottle with a single white rose on the label, dripping red from its stem. Justice isn't clean. It stains you, but it's still worth the spill. You know what they say. Love is thicker than blood. But when legacy's on the line, even family becomes fatal. One forged will, one deadly triangle, and one woman who wouldn't let the fire die down. This was the will that killed us. And it almost killed the truth with it.